Good evening, everyone. My name is Penny Wyatt, and I'm the Director of Family Programs and External Relations for the Division of Student Affairs. I'm very grateful that you have joined us tonight for this very important webinar topic, Emergency Preparedness and Response. So we know that having your student move away to Tulane and being in a different part of the country and climate that is susceptible to hurricanes, this might be really new content for you. And so we want to make sure that you hear about how the university is organized to prepare for extreme weather events and respond, and how we want your student to learn about these methods and practices and adopt those. And you can help guide them because you'll have this good information that you're going to get tonight. So I'm really pleased to have my colleague Meredith Beers, who is the Associate Director of Emergency Preparedness and Response here in our Office of Emergency Preparedness and Response, guide you through this really important content tonight. So I'm going to turn things over to Meredith, and I'll rejoin you when we get to the Q&A. I will just remind you that with our webinars, we ask that you hold your questions until we prompt you to type them in. Meredith has presented this material many years, and it gets refined every time. And so we've really tried to anticipate your questions and provide really solid content for you. So if you will just listen along, if you want to make notes of any questions you want to ask, we'll try to answer as many as we can this evening. But if you'll just wait until we tell you to ask, then that'll help everything go more smoothly and efficiently tonight. So Meredith, I'm going to turn things over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny, and good evening. Welcome to Tulane, y'all. We're really excited that you and your student have picked Tulane and cannot wait to welcome you in person this August. As Penny said, my name is Meredith Beers, and I'm the Associate Director of Emergency Preparedness and Response in Tulane's Office of Emergency Preparedness and Response. Tonight, we're going to talk about emergency planning and what my office does, and most specifically, hurricane planning. So our office is tasked with helping prepare, prevent as much as possible, and respond to incidents at the university. We cover all hazards, and we'll get a little bit more into that on the next slide, but we are not just hurricane preparedness. We do many things. One of the things that makes our plans so great and how we prepare is that our plans are flexible and scalable. So we plan for worst case scenario, but we can whittle them down as need be and get all the necessary departments involved depending on what the incident is. But our priority is to make sure that the safety of our students, faculty, and staff is foremost and forefront. So with that, let's talk about all hazards preparedness. So we look at anything that could happen and then think about what are the most likely scenarios that could affect us at Tulane in New Orleans. And so things that we do prepare for that are likely scenarios include active shooters and boil water advisories. If you're not from somewhere where you have those, that's where the potable drinking water is no longer drinkable. And so we have to boil our water, or in our case, we bring in bottled water to campus until the city's drinking water supply has rebounded and is drinkable again. Fires, biochemical spills, pandemics, and we just had one of those a few years ago, power outages, which are not infrequent in New Orleans with our aged infrastructure, and then, of course, severe weather. But the focus for tonight is our hurricane system, or our hurricane preparedness. So one thing that makes our preparedness really important is how to stay connected. Your students are going to be informed about emergencies, but we know you want to be informed as well. So families will not receive what we call TU alerts. Those are the emergency alerts that go to our students. Perhaps your students, middle school or high school, had an alert system where you got the exact same message that your student did. Because you're most likely not in New Orleans, we need your student to be aware, but we will also keep you informed. So you can stay informed through email, through the Tulane Emergency webpage, and then Tulane Today, which is a publication that comes out from communications and marketing that includes really important information. And if we are in an emergency situation, like with a hurricane, it will have information about what the university is doing, what your student should be doing, and how you as a family member can help. We do also have social media and encourage you to follow us. at Tulane U is the university's flagship channel. And then my office's is at Tulane Emergency. Do follow those. Those will be the official channels of communication for social media during emergencies. The parent Facebook page is not an official source, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So when we have an emergency, we will talk with your students. They are going to be informed. Our primary methods are through email, and it's their Tulane assigned email address. So whatever it is at tulane.edu. So make sure they know to check that. The emergency website, which is emergency.tulane.edu, will also have our emergency alerts posted there. And then we use a mass notification system, which again, your students, high school may have had something that you were able to receive these alerts from. You won't be able to receive these alerts because we need the people in New Orleans and at Tulane to get them, but these are called TU alerts. Your student is automatically enrolled in them. They will be able to start receiving them in August once they have moved in to campus. So during that move-in week period, your students will be enrolled. They will be, if we have a boil water advisory, a power outage, they will start getting these alerts. The number one way that we communicate through our TU alert system is text message. So when your student is filling out their information in Gibson, and I'll show you in a few screens how to do this, they need to make sure their cell phone number is listed and not yours, because if we have a boil water advisory, I need your student to know what's going on, not you. Then again, email, automatically enrolled. Your students will get those at their Tulane email address. And then the system we use for our mass notification is called Everbridge. And the Everbridge app is something that is free that they can download. They won't be able to log in until move-in week in August, but that's something that we also push alerts through. When we have a hurricane coming, we are going to talk to your student. We are going to communicate a lot with your student. Not only will we be doing communications through TU alerts, through emails from our office email, Housing and Residence Life and Dining Services will also send a lot of emails to your students at their Tulane email address. Most of the information that is coming out, especially from my office, will wind up on our social media at Tulane Emergency on Instagram. We used to be really good at Twitter. Now we are really good at Instagram. So make sure that you and your students are following us there. The information that's coming out to students through all of these different portals from these different groups is critical. And so they have to follow instructions that are coming from university officials. This does include student affairs and, of course, the Tulane Police Department. So I mentioned our text alerts. This is our number one way of talking to your student. Students need to make sure their cell phone numbers are entered in their Gibson profile under mobile phone. And so when they go to Gibson and log in, under update address and phone and email, that's where they put their cell phone number. They want to make sure, again, we want parents to be informed, but we need your student to get the information first because they are the ones who are on campus. So please make sure that they can do this at any point between now and move-in. If they get a new number after move-in, just make sure that that information is always up to date. The Everbridge app is a great app, so we can push emergency alerts to your student through that. It is free and available in the Apple and Android store. They won't be able to log in until August when they are officially in our system, but they'll log in with their Tulane email, so their tulane.edu login credential. Unfortunately, family members, again, this won't work for you, but it is for your student, for their safety and security. One of the other great features of Everbridge is it has 3 safety features, which your students can use at any point once they're logged in. The first is Safe Corridor. This is something that if your student is studying late at the library one night and has to walk to their residence hall, but doesn't want to call Tulane Police for a human escort, this is a virtual escort. They can set a timer, put in a 4-digit code that they create, and say, I think it'll take me 10 minutes to walk from the library to their residence hall. They enter the code, they hit start. When they get to their residence hall, they put that same 4-digit code back in the system, and that turns the virtual escort off and it lets the system know, okay, I made it. If they don't turn the virtual escort off, an alarm will go off, alerting Tulane police and our police dispatchers. We have our own dispatchers separate from the New Orleans Police Department. Will call your student to make sure they're okay. If they are not okay and need assistance, our police will be able to use a geo-tracking system that turns on when the alarm goes off to help your student come find them and assist them. If they just forgot to turn the alarm off, they saw someone started talking, were on the phone, forgot that totally, it happens. We get it. No big deal. Our goal is to make sure your student is safe. So if they forgot to turn it off, that's all they say. Everybody goes about their evening. The next feature is emergency call. That is pre-programmed to call Tulane police dispatchers. So if your student winds up in a situation where they think they need the police, they push that, they're connected to our dispatchers, and they can tell them what the issue is and what assistance they think is needed. The last is the giant red button, the SOS feature. This button, if you push it, or when your student pushes it, it will turn on their forward-facing camera, alert Tulane's police dispatchers where their location is, and it will turn on their microphones. So this is the I need assistance right now. It is critical. It is urgent. Everbridge also sends an alert to our police command staff, so our chief of police, assistant chiefs, captains, and my office, so that we all know a student is in need of assistance. Again, if they push it by mistake, when dispatch calls them, all they have to say is, so sorry, pushed it in error. But if they really do need assistance, then we will be able to send our police to where they are so that they can get the assistance they need. If they are out of town, so if you live in Chicago and your student pushes it there, our dispatchers will still call, but then can connect them to the Chicago PD to send assistance if needed. It is a great feature. Again, that forward-facing camera does turn on, so people have done it accidentally when they're in the bathroom, and we all get to see that video. So use with caution. It is a big red button so that you try to hopefully only push it when needed. Just so y'all know, I was out of the country earlier this year, and we were curious how accurate the location services would be and if it would work. My coworker and I set up to do a test. He knew exactly where I was in the city that I was in the country that I was in, and it worked seamlessly and quickly. So it is a really great feature that we have through Everbridge. So we get to meet y'all in August when you come from move-in. It is going to be very hot. New Orleans also gets a lot of thunderstorms during the summer. It brings a lot of humidity, a lot of mosquitoes. Occasionally, that means that we might need to slow down move-in operations because of lightning. And so if that happens, you can opt in to get emergency alerts for move-in by texting TU move-in to 888-777. That is live now. You will get alerts just during move-in week, and then the Monday or Tuesday after move-in week is over, your numbers will be removed from this opt-in. It is something that for each move-in year, you'll be able to re-opt into so that you can stay abreast of any emergencies that may occur during that 1 week period. So let's talk about why we're here tonight. Hurricanes. So it is hurricane season. Hurricane season runs from June 1st to November 30th. When storms form in the Atlantic, we have usually a little bit over a week's notice, which is fantastic for an emergency manager. It's fantastic for planning, and it really gives us a lot of lead time to make sure that we know what we're doing and to get all of our preparations in place. We really, about 5 days out, will know probably where the storm is going to go. So again, love the storms that form in the Atlantic, lots of lead time, big runway. More and more, though, we're seeing storms that are forming in the Gulf of Mexico, so somewhere down near Cuba or actually within the Gulf. And these storms, we might get 4 days notice. That is a condensed timeline for us to work with. However, we can do it. We have done it many times. Our facilities crew, our dining crew, our student affairs and housing staffs, all of these groups work incredibly well together, and we spend many months out of the year planning and preparing for hurricanes so that if we need to get ready in 2 or 3 days, we can. Our decisions for what we're going to do as a university have to be made on a little bit of a tighter timeline with a little bit less information. But because of the advances in satellite technology and really fantastic forecasters that we work with, we can make a pretty well-educated decision a few days out, even with something that might just be forming and is forecast to make landfall 2 or 3 days later. So with a hurricane, we can get a lot of things: high winds, storm surge, heavy rainfall, which can then, of course, lead to inland flooding. The impacts that come from hurricanes can last, from hours to days to weeks to even months. These can include power outages, loss of internet. We can have water and sewerage pumping station issues, which can lead to sewerage backups and or boil water advisories. Again, flooding. If there is flooding, that can lead to supply chain disruptions or interruptions. And then, of course, fuel shortages. So all of these different components are part of our decision-making process of what do we think a storm is going to do? How will it affect us? What are the impacts that we could be feeling? So these are just the things that go through our minds that we are keeping in the forefront of our mind as we are doing decision-making. So our decision-making comes into 3 categories: close and shelter in place, close and evacuate, or continue normal operations. We're going to start with that one. It's my favorite. That means the storm is not coming near us and we will have almost no impacts from the storm whatsoever. That means it's going somewhere else. That one is bad for other places, but really good for us. Close and evacuate. If the university decides that we need to evacuate, this means that the impacts to New Orleans and Tulane's are expected to be incredibly significant. And this includes the impacts as the storm is coming, not just the after effects once the storm has passed. We can, as a university, declare a mandatory university evacuation, even if the city of New Orleans has not declared a mandatory evacuation. That is really important because if you're watching the news and they say New Orleans is not evacuating, but then you get an email from Tulane saying we are evacuating, you go with what we have said, not the city. What we'll do is to make sure that your student can get out, because your student does need a personal evacuation plan, is we will run shuttles from the campus, the Uptown campus, to the New Orleans airport until about a day before landfall to help make sure that your student is able to get to the airport without relying on Uber or Lyft or a cab. If we say that we are going to close and evacuate, our classes will be canceled. We will cease all normal business operations and everyone must evacuate. We do check the residence halls to make sure no one is trying to hide out in their dorm room. If we have said we need to evacuate, we are expecting something incredibly significant that would make staying unsafe. And then the most likely thing that will happen is close and shelter in place. We have done this, I think we did it 7 times in 2020, twice in 2021. We went a few years with no hurricanes, which was wonderful. It was an emergency manager's dream come true. But we are prepared for all of these things, even in the years that we wind up with no storms. Sheltering in place is something we are tried and tested at. In this case, we transition to online or remote classes, or we might cancel classes completely or do some hybrid combination to a certain point. We will cease our normal business operations, and students who live on campus in residence halls, so that would be all first-year students, will shelter in place in their residence halls. We only do this if we expect the impacts to New Orleans and to Tulane to be manageable. So, a brief power outage, we can handle that. Flooding that is expected to be brief, we can handle that. We get that when there's a good thunderstorm that rolls through town. But again, like if we were closing and evacuating, we will run shuttles from the Uptown campus to the New Orleans airport so that if you and your student decide you'd rather your student evacuate, they have that option. So like I mentioned a little bit ago, there's a lot of factors that go into how we make a decision. Not just the impacts from the storm, but the storm size, the forward speed. So how fast is it moving? What is storm surge predicted to be? What category of storm is it? And then what storm is the direction relative to where New Orleans is? On the graphic, you can see a cone. Just because we may not be in the cone, if we are near the cone, that we will likely still feel some sort of effect, even if it's wind and rain. So the cone isn't a great model to go by because there's a lot of wobbling and shifting that happens with storms as they move closer to landfall. But it is a guide that we can use. We do talk to a lot of meteorologists. We talk to the National Hurricane Center. We have a vendor that we use named Perryweather that we talk to for all storms. And then we have a local meteorologist on contract who, when we see a storm coming, we're talking to 2 to 3 times a day. We try to make a decision about are we going to close and shelter in place or close and evacuate 2.5 to 3 days before projected landfall. I say projected because it is a guess. These storms can slow down, they can speed up as they're moving through the Gulf. So that's our timeline. So if there is a storm and we make a decision 2 days before landfall and you say, no, Meredith said it'd be 2.5 to 3 days. Again, the storm could have sped up a little bit. And that's why that timeline shifted. But we do try to make a decision as early as possible so that you and your student can make the decision that is right for you, particularly if we're sheltering in place as early as possible. Every storm is unique. In 2020, I think we had 7 storms come our way. It might have been 6, but basically every 10 days we were preparing for a hurricane, and each storm was different. And its final location of where it made landfall, how big it was, how far reaching the effects were, all different. And so we don't get complacent, and we don't want you to either if we have a very active season on the Louisiana coast. So sheltering in place, this is something we do for most storms, and we are very good at it. All of our residence halls and select other buildings, such as the Commons, which is where the dining hall is, maintain full power, which does include air conditioning. Hurricane season does fall in the heat of summer for New Orleans, so it gets very hot. So air conditioning is very important. Students who live on campus, so that will be all first-year students through third-year students, are provided a 3-day supply of shelf-stable food. This usually is something like peanut butter, individual kind of Chef Boyardee or macaroni and cheese, those kinds of things. If your student does have dietary restrictions, then they will work with our dining provider to make sure that they have what they need for their diet, and they aren't given something that doesn't work for them. Students will not be allowed to leave their shelter location, so their residence hall, from the onset of when we get tropical storm force winds until after we have completed our damage assessment after the storm has passed. Sometimes this is 12 hours, sometimes this is more than 24 hours. It depends on the storm because each storm is unique. Your student will get a TU alert from our office that says, we have tropical storm force winds, remain indoors. You will get an all clear when you can leave your building, and they should stay inside. One thing that we do when we see a storm coming is we cancel all recreation activities. So concerts, events at the Riley Recreation Center, events at the Lavin Burnick Center for University Life, everything gets canceled because we turn those spaces into shelter locations for our employees who stay to make sure that your students are safe and that campus remains safe. So if your student stays and they say, I'll go to the gym to work out, that won't be an option because we have taken that space over for essential employees. The library will be closed because we need those employees to be able to go home and not need to be staffing a building that does not have full backup power. When you look at the picture on your screen, you see students sleeping in a hallway. They're not in their residence hall rooms, as you can tell. So what has happened in this moment is these students, well, all students received an alert, moved to an interior space because the winds picked up so much that we didn't want them near windows. So these students went to the internal hallway in their building with blankets and pillows. And as you can see, they look perfectly comfortable with their phones and iPads and everything is plugged in. But we do want to make sure that they are safe because safety is our number one priority for them. And so there will be a period during some storms where they can't even be in their rooms, but have to be in an interior hallway. Um, so that is something just for you to be aware of as you're thinking about, do you want your student to stay during a hurricane or to evacuate? If you decide that your student should evacuate, or if the university has said we need to evacuate, plan to be gone for at least 5 days. This means think about classes, think about clothes, think about medications that your student will need, all of the documents that your student would need to fly somewhere, to return somewhere, so driver's license, passport, their Tulane splash card, because they're going to need that to get back into their residence hall room on campus. Um, Anything to attend classes remotely or virtually. So not just a laptop, but the laptop charger. If they have, hard copy books that they need for their classes, they need to take those. Because at a certain point, if we are doing remote classes, the excuse of, well, I left that in my dorm room won't be an excuse anymore because they should have been prepared to be gone for at least a week. Portable chargers, electronics, the actual chargers for those electronic devices, I highly recommend that as part of their going to college kit, that they bring portable chargers that they just constantly keep charged, throw in their backpack, use it between classes for their phones, and then recharge it every night, just as a habit to get into so that they have a backup charger just in case. Valuables and sentimental items. This one's always a really big one. College is not the place to bring family heirlooms to. But if your child decides that they need to bring their grandfather's Rolex watch to college, and I say that because we had someone do that a couple of years ago, make sure that they evacuate with it. The student I have in mind did not evacuate for a hurricane with grandpa's Rolex, and it was stolen from their room. And luckily, Tulane police were able to retrieve it through a different series of serial numbers searching and going through a bunch of pawn shops. But make sure that these items that have great sentimental value or financial value, this probably isn't the place to bring them unless every time your student leaves or evacuates for hurricane, they're going to take those things with them. I will say I did go to Tulane for undergrad and grad school. And when I was an undergrad, we evacuated for 2 hurricanes. The first time I evacuated, I planned to be gone as if I was leaving for a semester, and took everything but the kitchen sink and except my course books. And at that time, when I went to college, there weren't online classes, so it wasn't a big deal. My second evacuation, I thought we'll be back in 3 days, and I took 3 days worth of clothes, and we were gone for an entire semester. That was for Hurricane Katrina. So I can definitely say you don't need to take everything with you, but definitely plan for that full week, because then you at least have more than 3 shirts with you, and you have the other things that you need now in this digital age where you can attend your classes. For evacuating, your student does need a personal evacuation plan, which they would have put in their housing portal application. If the plan they entered needs to change, that is not a big deal. They can do it through their Gibson portal at this point in time. Please, please, please do not rely on the university to evacuate your student. We are not your primary plan. If the university declares an evacuation, we need your student to be able to implement their plan, which if that means we take them to the New Orleans airport, great. But then they're getting on a flight to come home to you, to go to family friends, to go visit friends at another college, whatever it is. If that means you're coming to pick them up, we love that. Please do get them. Maybe take a friend of theirs with you. But we are the last resort for a mandatory evacuation. If we are sheltering in place, we cannot evacuate your student. The best we can do for helping them get out is get to the airport. So really keep these things in mind as you're thinking about what will your evacuation plan look like for a mandatory evacuation. So again, you and your student really need to think about, are y'all comfortable with your students sheltering in place during a tropical storm or a hurricane? That is a personal comfort level for if we are sheltering in place. If we say evacuate, you don't have to make that decision. Your student must go. But for sheltering in place, is this something that you're comfortable with? Not everybody is. That's fine. You absolutely can evacuate your student. You can also evacuate your student before the university has made a decision. A lot of people get a little bit antsy if we're getting down to that 2.5 days before landfall and they want to make that decision. That is perfectly acceptable, and we encourage you to do that. This is your student and their safety, so you are going to know what you think is best there. The only thing we do ask is that your student communicate with their professors that they are evacuating in advance of whatever the storm's name is. And their professors have been told to grant grace and understanding. And also remember, a lot of professors are trying to prepare their own homes in advance of the approaching storm. So if you decide, if the university does say we're going to shelter in place and you think, okay, I don't think I'm comfortable with this. You've never been through a hurricane, you have been through a hurricane, whatever the situation may be. Again, once that decision is made, your student is more than welcome to evacuate, and we will provide shuttles to the airport for them. One thing of note, only because we have been through many hurricanes over the years, strongly encourage you to make sure that your students' belongings are covered under your homeowner's insurance, and that if at some point your student moves off campus, and maybe even for in the residence hall, talk to your insurance carrier about this, that they have renter's insurance. And I know these slides will be posted and can be emailed, so if you don't write the link down right now, that's okay. So as you think about your student's personal evacuation plan, which again can be used for shelter in place and must be used for a mandatory evacuation that the university calls, think about where will your student go? Maybe have a couple of options. So if you think, okay, student will fly home to us, but suddenly you're not available, can student also fly to another family member, a family friend, something like that? When will the decision be made that you and your student make? So don't wait for the university. What is your comfort timeline? Is it when we see that the storm has been named and is entering the Gulf and that New Orleans is in or right near that cone? Is it once we know for certain that New Orleans is in the cone? So think about what is your comfort level and what do you think your timeline would be? How is your student going to leave this city? Is it going to be by airplane? Is someone coming to pick your student up? Are they riding with someone else? So is their roommate from New Orleans and their roommate's family has said, we will take your student with them. Those are all viable options. And then this one's important. Who is your student's designated out-of-town contact? So just in case something happens, we want your student to have someone that they can be in touch with and who can be reaching out to them. This is also really important for you to make sure that your student probably doesn't have a lot of phone numbers memorized because we don't do that anymore, that they have emergency phone numbers written down, preferably laminated, that they keep in their wallet or purse, but somewhere that is on them, that as they are leaving, if their phone dies, that happens, we know it happens, that they can still call someone because they have a phone number written down with the associated name. And then if your student has a service animal or an emotional support animal, or if your student lives off campus their senior year, they have a pet, make sure that those animals are included in their evacuation plan. We don't want your student to leave their animal behind in the residence halls. That is not fair to the animal. And we don't have the staff to go and care for the animal. So make sure that the pet, service animal or emotional support animal is part of that evacuation plan. So how can you assist your student in all of this, aside from the things on the 3 slides that we just went through? Make sure that you are reading all the university's announcements. Check the emergency webpage because that will have all emails that have gone out on that page. Please. I know the parent Facebook page is a source of a lot of information, but during emergencies, it can be a source of misinformation. The parents on there are well-meaning, but an experience that they had with a hurricane 3 years ago is not the same experience that is happening with the current hurricane. So please do not turn to that as a source because it's outdated information. Um, do watch our local news in New Orleans. We have WWL-TV, Fox 8, and WDSU. Those channels are all great and they're all local, which means local meteorologists, and they understand how the specific storm is going to affect New Orleans. I do urge you, please do not watch the Weather Channel. They're going to show footage of the worst moment of the worst storm that we have had in recent history again and again and again. And if Jim Cantore shows up anywhere near New Orleans, they are going to always show footage of New Orleans. They are getting ratings, they are getting people viewing, which is wonderful for them, but it can be a little bit scary and overwhelming, especially if you've not been through a hurricane. So please stick with our local news because that's going to give you a more realistic view of what we are about to go through. And then I'm sure you've had to do this a few times already, but remind your student to check their Tulane email account. That is where all of these communications are also going to be hitting them. So after a hurricane, once the storm has come, it's gone, the rain has stopped, the wind has stopped, students immediately want to go outside. They need to wait for us to send an all clear. It will come as a TU alert and an email. They've got to follow all the instructions from administration because it's for their safety. We don't want them cooped up any longer than they need to be, but we don't want them coming out if campus is not safe for them to, go from building to building, to go from their residence hall to the dining hall. So we need the time to make sure that there aren't down trees, and if there are, to clear a path so that it is safe for students to traverse around campus. Again, all of these emails and updates will be sent to their Tulane email and TU alerts, which will be text message and email. If your student is off campus, so if they have evacuated or once they're able to live off campus as seniors, they should not return to any of the university's campuses or buildings until they get the all clear and are told that they can do so. Just because our buildings might have power does not mean that they are safe yet for occupancy. We are still clearing them, making sure that they are actually safe for people to be in. And then again, our buildings might have power, but that doesn't mean that we're ready for classes to resume in person. We might have some cleanup work to do. So students should be prepared to attend classes remotely for several days, maybe even a few weeks after the storm. We do try to, if we have sheltered in place, we have students in the library or in their residence halls, we do try to open the library, the LBC, the Lavin Burnick Center, the Commons, and then take our essential employees out of the Riley Center and get those spaces opened as soon as possible post-storm so that students do have some venues to go to that are not just their residence halls. So I know this has been a lot of information, and at this point, Penny, I will turn it back to you to run the Q&A portion of our session.
Okay. So family members, you can start submitting your questions now, and we'll get to as many of those as we can this evening. And if there are some that we don't get to, we'll try to include those in a follow-up slide or in a follow-up email to folks. So I'm looking. I don't see any questions yet. I know Meredith's done a great job of putting all of this content together, and her experience and leadership in this endeavor is really a boon to all of you and your students, believe me. So I don't see any questions. I think maybe you have just met everybody's needs for information. Okay, I see some. Well,
Oh, I was going to say
well,
the first time in 7 years.
here's a really, this isn't even a question. So this is great. It says, not a question, but my daughter was there for Ida in 2021, and Tulane did a great job taking care of everyone. Thank you so much. That's really nice to hear. So thank you.
Thank you.
So
We
one
appreciate that.
question is, how hard is it to book a flight during hurricanes? So do you want to address that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, people say it's either really hard or really easy. I actually think it's easy because what happens is the airlines are sending extra planes to New Orleans to help try to depopulate the city as much as possible. And airlines don't want to leave their airplanes in New Orleans because if the airport gets hit, then they have a risk of losing some of their assets. So they're trying to get as many flights out as possible. One thing I do encourage is for you to buy a refundable ticket. Um, just so if you say, okay, student, we're going to evacuate, and then your student says, no, 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 the university's sheltering, I want to stay in shelter in place. Um, then you can use that ticket another time. And I would, for the return ticket, if you don't buy a one way, but if you do buy the full round trip, again, I would do refundable, but make it for at least 5 days post when the storm is supposed to make landfall so that you have the room, because we won't know when we're reopening until after the storm and after our damage assessment.
And the airport might be going through the same process too.
Yes,
So to give
yes.
yourself a little bit of cushion there. One of the other questions is how are class expectations handled during the week of an evacuation?
So professors are grant a lot of grace. They understand that students are trying to leave. Many of them are professors are actually trying to prepare their own homes and their own families. So a lot of professors tend to do online classes, so either asynchronous or say we'll meet remotely on this day for a synchronous class. But professors, by and large, are very understanding. If a professor is not, then there is a grievance process through academic affairs that can be utilized. But the number of times that I've heard of students needing to go through that process in the past 4 years has been pretty low. So most professors tend to understand that hurricanes are, for many of our students, they're a new thing. They are a scary situation. And for our professors who have been through these, they know what they need to be doing at their own homes and that they often need that time that they would be in class to be preparing their own personal plans.
So, one question, I'm not sure if this is the right acronym for the abbreviation for the airport. It says, how do kids get to Houston Airport if MSO is closed? But we're MSY, the New Orleans Airport.
Yeah.
So I think this has been answered. We're trying to give people information early enough so that they can make those flights and get out, getting to the airport from our shuttles while the airport's still open and flights are still running.
Correct.
Um, so one question is, will the semester be extended later in December if classes are canceled for a certain period of time? And these are the dynamics that the people in charge working with Meredith have to figure out each time there is a storm. So that's a hard thing to kind of predict at this point, just with a sort of, scenario
It's,
that you're throwing out
yeah.
there.
So there are makeup days built into the semester.
So,
Your student can see them. You can see them. They're on the Tulane online academic calendar.
yes.
They are typically Saturdays and sometimes Sundays, which are highly unpopular. But they are built in that way so that if we have to close too many times or too long for a hurricane, that hopefully we don't have to extend. I will say from past experiences, the semester has not been extended, but they have adjusted what the final exam schedule looks like. And sometimes that means that the last day of classes is instead when the final exam would have been given in December, and that last day of class becomes the final. But we typically, it's been, that's been the adjustment that has been made instead of
For several
going,
years now.
yeah, instead of going longer, it's just adjusting how finals are handled.
Right.
And they have not moved them into January. They still, because of December graduations, need that stuff to all be done in December.
Right. There's a question that I'm not even going to read all the details in because it might just be distracting. And so this is somebody who said, "Oh, I thought in the past there was an option for XYZ." And so that's what we mean about don't go on past experience because there were certain dynamics in play at that time that might have meant there was a different kind of response. And that's why you need to take these recommendations from Meredith about how to create a plan and and rely on the situation and the people who are in charge, who are planning everything and creating the response, and cautioning everything, giving everybody the cautions to pay attention to. So, Meredith, do you want to say anything more about that?
The only thing I would add is if you are hesitant about your students staying if we shelter in place, then evacuate them. Have them leave pre-storm because doing something post-storm is far more difficult because we don't know what the storm is going to do. We can
Right.
guess, but that's like asking a magic 8 ball. It's not a crystal
Right.
ball.
You wouldn't be able to tell
So
in advance that the electricity might be out in the city for X number of days or something like that.
right, or that the pumps fail and that we have flooding for a week. So, making decisions before a storm and doing it earlier is better.
Yeah. And I do think that if you're a family who's very far from New Orleans, just think really divergently. Maybe it's not getting your student all the way to where you live in Maine or Oregon or, kind of in the outlier state or something that's farther. Maybe you have family members or good family friends who live in a big city with a large airport where there might be a lot of flights, and that might be a different option for you to consider. So, kind of take some time to think as a family, look at your resources, look at these possibilities, and make a plan. And then know that you might adjust it once you get more information, as things get closer, if that happens. So another question was, do students ever have a hard time getting a seat on a shuttle going to the airport during an evacuation? And I don't think that's been the case. I mean, I
It
think
has
we've
not,
we've run
knock
them.
on wood, that's not been an issue.
I think they do need to pay attention to the alerts that they'll get that'll give them the shuttle schedule and where to
Yep.
pick up, where to get on the shuttle and all of that.
Yeah.
And to to have thought ahead of time about what they need in their go bag. Like if I've got to take these certain things, I've got to make sure I've got my course materials, I've got my charger, I've got enough clothes for X number of days, that they've thought through that. So even sort of as they're packing for to come to Tulane, to even start having that conversation. Well, what of these things that you're going to take to school will need to be in that small set of stuff, and do you have a good bag that you could carry all that in? Because you might be thinking, oh, we'll send them to campus with large suitcases. Well, they might need something that's a little bit more of like an overnight or a weekender kind of bag. So give some thought to that.
I would say, Penny, I would add here that shuttles and transportation will be emailing and posting on their social what the
Right.
schedule is. They bring in extra charter buses from a local charter bus company to do the airport shuttle runs.
Yes.
So it's not just our 30 passenger buses. They
Right.
do have
Right.
56 passenger buses.
Yeah.
But make sure that if your student is flying out, that they already have a seat on the airplane, that you have
Yes.
purchased that ticket. Do not wait until they're at the airport to buy a ticket because that's when they could run into some issues.
Yeah, because they might not even let them into the airport if it's getting really close to time of
Yeah.
landfall, if they didn't already have a ticket, if they can't prove that they have a ticket already.
Yeah.
So, well, I
And
think that,
Penny, can I add one thing about
yes,
luggage for the airplane? Um, I am a habitual overpacker, just from the nature of who I am. I love packing cubes because I can pack everything I need in 2 carry-ons to get me through 2 weeks. That way I don't have to stand in line to check luggage. And so that is something
good.
that as you think about, okay, normally you need to be at the airport. I'm one of those get there 2 hour earlies. My best friend is get there 40 minutes before boarding. And before a hurricane comes, you want to be there about 4 hours in advance because the security line will be long.
Right,
So if you can avoid doing baggage check and just do carry-ons, that will make the process a little bit more smooth.
right. And you can get those packing cubes from a lot of different online sources. So that's another good thing to look for as as the student is using graduation gift money and getting everything prepared this summer. That's another good thing to think about. That and those extra chargers. Okay, well, Meredith, thank you so much for providing all this good information. And parents, we're happy that you joined us tonight. Um, I always like to look at this as the more prepared you are, then hopefully the less you'll actually need this information. But it's better to be forewarned and prepared. Um, rather than caught off guard. And so we do want you to have this. Your student is getting information as well during their orientation modules that they're doing over the summer. So that's really important that they're taking in that information and that they're owning this process. So we know that typically you've handled all of these kinds of things for your family up to this point, but it's now time for you to be helping your student get their minds around this and really own that they will have to um, take care of a lot of these things themselves and work in conjunction with you, but they're going to be the person on the ground having to make the decisions and sorting through all the information too. And so so have a family conversation about this and build this into your preparation for the summer. Anything else, Meredith?
That's it. Enjoy your summer, and we are looking forward to meeting y'all in August.